The sun was about to be plucked like an overripe fruit, and here they were, in what amounted to the universe's worst game of hide and seek. Solara Vex kicked a loose stone across the desolate expanse of the temple city, her boot connecting with a satisfying thud. "There's optimism," she muttered to herself, scanning the ruins. Because nothing says salvation like rummaging through the leftovers of a civilization that thought this place was a good idea. Her mentor, Arnon Thorne, chuckled a sound like gravel in a blender. "A bit late to develop taste, Solara. We're here to find that relic, not critique architecture. Unless, of course, you're looking to branch out." His voice carried a blend of sarcasm and the weary patience of someone who'd been disappointed too many times to count. Solara shot him her best "I'm not amused" look. Branching out into pessimism sounds just about right. The temple city loomed around them, a skeletal reminder of humanity's past hubris. Once a beacon of prosperity, or so the legend said, now it was just a graveyard of dreams and possibly bones if you knew where to look. And they knew where to look all right. Right up the collective rear end of history. "You reckon these aliens will care if we find this thing?" Solara asked, weaving through the rubble, her eyes darting for any glint of ancient tech. "Care?" Arnon scoffed, pausing to wipe the dust off his worn goggles. "Care's not in their vocabulary. Profit, though, that's a word they understand in every language. Right? Because a sun's more useful when it's not, shining," Solara quipped, trying to ignore the gnawing pit in her stomach that had nothing to do with hunger. Arnon stopped, his face turning solemn for the first time since they'd landed. "Don't underestimate them. The conglomerate doesn't leave loose ends, especially not ones that mess with their bottom line." Solara nodded, her fingers idly tracing the remnants of a stone pillar. "Noted. So what's plan B?" "There is no plan B," Arnon replied, and his tone left no room for argument. "We find the relic, or we go extinct." The thought hung in the air like an accusation nobody wanted to acknowledge. They both knew that in this universe, people like them were about as valuable as a match in a volcano. As they moved deeper into the ruins, the city's skyline, what was left of it, loomed above them like a set of rotten teeth. Solara tried to shake off the unease that kept clinging to her like a bad smell. It wasn't just the threat of the aliens. It was the silence, the kind that screamed louder than any explosion. "You think they'll name a holiday after us when we pull this off?" Solara asked, trying to lighten the mood. Arnon snorted. "Sure. The Let's Not Die Horribly Day. It'll be a hit with the kids." Finally, something to look forward to. Their banter, though comforting, was a thin veneer over the desperate reality they faced. The aliens, a faceless conglomerate of cosmic capitalists, had declared Earth's sun their next acquisition, and they weren't exactly known for their negotiating skills. As they approached what looked like the remnants of an entrance, a figure stepped out from the shadows. He was thin, with a face like a weasel that had lost a fight with a blender, the kind of face that made you want to count your fingers after shaking his hand. "Lance," Solara greeted, her voice dripping with as much warmth as a polar vortex. "Solara, Arnon, fancy meeting you in this celestial gutter," Lance replied, showing a grin that belonged on a wanted poster. "Fancy?" Arnon grunted. "That's one word for it." Lance ignored the jab, his eyes darting nervously between them and the ruins. "I've got something you might want to see," he said, motioning them to follow. His voice was low, conspiratorial, like he was offering them a deal on slightly used souls. They followed him through a narrow passage, their footsteps echoing in the oppressive silence. Solara couldn't help but wonder if this was another one of Lance's infamous wild goose chases. If it was, she'd be tempted to start a new life as a professional recluse. "Here," Lance said, stopping in front of what looked like a makeshift altar. On it rested a contraption that defied immediate understanding, all wires, gears, and a faint, pulsing light. "That's it?" Solara asked, crossing her arms. "Looks like a bad marriage between a toaster and a disco ball," Lance chuckled nervously. "Just wait." He reached out and tapped a sequence on the device. The light intensified, casting a ghostly glow that made the hairs on Solara's arms stand up. The air felt charged like the moment before a storm. "I think we found our relic," Arnon murmured, a rare note of awe in his voice. "We did it, Solara," Lance said, though there was a tremor in his voice that Solara didn't like. "Why do I get the feeling there's a but coming?" Solara asked. "Because," Lance admitted, his eyes shifting like rats in a sinking ship, "the conglomerate might not be as in the dark about this place as we'd hoped. There it was, the catch. Like finding a golden ticket with a bear trap attached." "And you're just mentioning this now," Arnon growled, his patience wearing thin. Lance shrugged, trying and failing to look nonchalant. "Timing's everything, right?" "Right," Solara said, her voice flat. "And yours, as usual, sucks." The realization that they were on borrowed time settled over them like a shroud. The aliens wouldn't wait long to collect their prize, relic or no relic. And if they were already sniffing around, then their window of opportunity was closing faster than a door in a hurricane. "Suggestions?" Solara asked, looking at Arnon. "We activate it," he replied, his eyes locked on the device, "and hope it does what the legends say." "Hope," Solara echoed, feeling the weight of the word. "Wonderful. Hey, it's kept us alive this long," Arnon said with a shrug. "Barely." Solara glanced at Lance, who was doing his best impression of a man who had forgotten how to breathe. "You staying?" Lance hesitated, his eyes flicking to the ancient device and then to the exits. "I never was one for sticking around when things got spicy," he said, already backing away. Solara and Arnon watched him go, his footsteps fading into the distance. "Figures," Solara said. "Rats always know when to jump ship." "Let him go," Arnon said. "We've got more pressing concerns, like figuring out how to switch on a device that might be their only hope or their final undoing." The silence returned, heavier than before. Solara stared at the relic, the light pulsing like a heartbeat. "Here goes nothing," she said, reaching for the controls. "That's the spirit," Arnon replied, though there was a hint of trepidation in his voice. The relic hummed to life, a low vibration that seemed to resonate in Solara's bones. She felt a strange connection to it, as if it were reaching out, whispering secrets of a bygone age. "Come on, you ancient hunk of junk," she muttered. "Show us you're not just a pretty paperweight." The relic responded, its light intensifying, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Solara held her breath, anticipation mingling with dread. It was a gamble, one that could either save their son or doom them all. "Well, it's not exploding," Arnon remarked, a glimmer of humor in his eyes. "Always a plus," Solara agreed. The relic's hum grew louder, a crescendo that filled the air with a palpable energy. Solara could feel it coursing through her, a tingling sensation that bordered on the edge of pain and exhilaration. "Whatever happens next," Arnon said, his voice steady, "we did our best." Solara nodded, her eyes locked on the relic. "I just hope our best is good enough." The relic's light reached a blinding peak, and then just as suddenly it dimmed, leaving them in a silence that felt like the aftermath of an unseen battle. "Did it work?" Solara breathed, hardly daring to hope. Before Arnon could reply, the ground shook, a deep rumble that sent dust cascading from the ceiling. Solara's heart leapt to her throat, the realization crashing over her. Whatever the relic had done, it wasn't subtle. "Looks like we just rang the galactic dinner bell," Arnon said, his voice wry despite the gravity of the situation. "Perfect," Solara replied, feeling the adrenaline surge through her veins. "Just perfect." The air was thick with the promise of danger, and Solara knew they were out of time. The aliens wouldn't take long to respond, and when they did, there'd be hell to pay. "We better move," Arnon said, urgency lacing his words. Solara nodded, tearing her gaze from the relic. "Let's find out if we're getting out of here alive." Together they turned and ran, the temple city's shadows swallowing them once more. The city sprawled around them like a forgotten crime scene, each ruin a ghost of past ambitions. Solara and Arnon skidded to a halt at a crossroads of cracked stone paths, trying to catch their breath. The relic's activation had been like setting off an interstellar flare, the kind that said, "Come and get us," We're open for business and we forgot to lock the door. Think we pissed off anything else? Solara asked, glancing at the shadows with suspicion, as if expecting them to lunge at her. Wouldn't be surprised, Arnon replied, his voice tinged with the kind of calm only the truly insane or terminally bored could muster. Surprise, surprise, we've kicked the hornet's nest. Great. I love being outnumbered by things with more teeth than I have fingers. They exchanged a look, the kind that said they both knew exactly how screwed they were, but were too stubborn or stupid to turn back. Solara tightened her grip on the makeshift weapon she'd picked off a scavenger back on the ship. It was more rust than gun, held together by spit and sheer willpower. Much like her. Which way? She asked, nodding towards the labyrinthine streets sprawling out like the veins of a sick cosmic beast. Left, Arnon suggested, pointing with the air of someone who knew as much about the city's layout as a blindfolded tourist with a broken GPS. Solara shrugged. Left it is. More chance to die horribly. They moved with purpose, or at least the best impression of it they could muster. As they shuffled further into the shadows, the city seemed to close in on them, each crumbling archway and toppled column a reminder that time wasn't the only enemy here. Ever think about how much easier this would be if we were dead? Arnon said as they stealthily navigated through what might have once been a market square, if you squinted and ignored the charred remnants of long-gone stalls. Sure, Solara shot back. But then I remember I'd miss your sunny disposition. A sudden noise caught their attention, a metallic clank that echoed through the air like a warning shot. Solara spun on her heel, eyes scanning the gloom for any sign of movement. You hear that? She whispered, though whispering probably didn't make much difference when your enemies could hear a pin drop from a mile away. Yep. Either it's a welcoming committee or something's about to rip our heads off. Lovely options. Can't we just have a nice, quiet relic hunt for once? Where's the fun in that? They pressed on, the oppressive air thickening with anticipation. As they turned a corner, the street opened into a wide plaza, the centerpiece a massive statue of some long-forgotten deity. Once majestic, it was now just a headless hunk of rock, arms outstretched as if asking for a refund on its dignity. Looks like we found the temple, Solara noted, nodding towards the grand, crumbling structure at the far end of the plaza. It loomed like the world's worst-kept secret, daring them to step inside. You sure? Arnon asked, though it was half-hearted at best. They both knew the temple was their best shot at finding more clues about the relic. Sure as I am that we're about to have company, Solara replied, gesturing to the shadows shifting at the temple's entrance. She could almost feel the menace in the air, a promise of violence that seemed to cling to their skin. Ah, hell, Arnon muttered, drawing his weapon. Let's just get this over with. They advanced cautiously, each step feeling like a countdown to disaster. The temple's entrance yawned before them, dark and foreboding, like the mouth of some ancient beast waiting to swallow them whole. Inside, the air was cool, carrying the faint scent of decay and secrets best left buried. Their footsteps echoed off the stone walls, a rhythmic reminder of their own mortality. Any idea what we're looking for? Solara asked, scanning the interior for anything that might resemble a clue, or at least something marginally more exciting than the dust bunnies currently winning the occupancy battle. Something shiny, Arnon suggested, his voice bouncing off the walls with all the cheer of a man at his own funeral. Right. Because that's not vague at all. They prowled through the temple's inner sanctum, their eyes adjusting to the dim light. It was a museum of relics from a time when humanity thought it could conquer the stars with a bit of elbow grease and a whole lot of hubris. Check these out, Solara said, nodding to a series of engravings on the walls. Each depicted a scene of cosmic triumphs and disasters, though it was hard to tell which was which. Looks like a bad trip, Arnon remarked, squinting at the carvings with the air of someone who'd seen a few cosmic disasters up close. Yeah, well, let's hope we don't add ourselves to the collection. As they moved deeper, the air grew tense, like they were trespassing on some ancient wound that had never quite healed. Solara's instincts screamed at her to turn back, to run and keep running until she was far away from this place and all its forgotten ghosts. Instead, she pressed on, because turning back was for people who still had hope, and she'd lost hers somewhere in the wreckage of her past. They reached a chamber at the heart of the temple, a cavernous space that seemed to hum with energy. In the center stood an altar, and on the altar a device, eerily similar to the one they'd activated earlier, yet different enough to make Solara's skin crawl. "Well, I'll be damned," Arnon muttered, stepping closer. "Looks like we hit the jackpot, or the landmine," Solara replied, eyeing the device with skepticism. It had the same pulsing light, but there was an edge to it, a feeling that it was watching them right back. "Only one way to find out," Arnon said, reaching for the controls. "Wait," Solara said, her instincts screaming louder now. "What if it's a trap?" At that moment, the walls around them groaned ominously. Those were never good noises, especially in a place known for eating interlopers for breakfast. Arnon glanced at her, his eyes hard with determination. "We didn't come this far to turn tail now." Before Solara could respond, the temple shuddered violently. The floor beneath them rumbled, cracks spiderwebbing outwards, threatening to swallow them whole. "Trap it is," Solara shouted, grabbing Arnon's arm and pulling him back just as the altar exploded in a shower of stone and light. The ancient security system had woken up cranky, and it didn't look like it was open to negotiation. They scrambled back, the floor collapsing where they'd stood only seconds before. The temple roared around them, debris raining down as if the universe itself had decided to purge them from existence. "Run!" Solara yelled, though it was probably redundant given the circumstances. They bolted for the exit, dodging falling stones and the deadly beams of light slicing through the air, the temple's final effort to ensure that no one left without a few extra holes. "Remind me not to trust ancient tech," Arnon grunted, narrowly avoiding a direct hit. "Noted," Solara replied, skidding around a corner and sprinting for the light of the entrance. The temple shuddered again, a final, furious tremor as they burst out into the open. The air was thick with dust and adrenaline, the city waiting for them like an indifferent witness to their close encounter with oblivion. Breathless, they staggered to a halt a safe distance away, watching as the temple finally gave in to gravity's embrace, collapsing in on itself with a resounding crash. "Well," Solara panted, wiping a streak of grime from her forehead. "That was fun." Arnon chuckled, a sound more akin to a cough. "If you have a strange definition of fun, sure." They stood there, catching their breath, the ruins around them an all too familiar reminder of their precarious situation. The relic was still out there, and the aliens would be closing in any minute. "So what now?" Solara asked, though she already knew the answer. They'd keep searching because there was no other choice. "Now," Arnon said, his voice grim yet resolute, "we find out if that little show was worth the price of admission." Solara nodded, the weight of their task settling over her like a lead cloak. They'd survived this round, but the game was far from over. And with every step they were reminded that in this universe, hope was a luxury they couldn't afford. They moved back into the city's embrace, the relic's glow in their minds, a beacon leading them onward. And whatever awaited them next, Solara was sure that between the crackling sarcasm and the stubborn resolve, they'd find a way, or die trying. As they trudged away from the smoking heap of stone that had once been a temple, Solara couldn't help but think about all the opportunities they'd missed to be somewhere else. Anywhere else, really. Maybe sipping something strong in a seedy bar light years away, where the only thing collapsing was her own liver. Instead, they were stuck in this desolate city, a place that seemed to specialize in ominous. Each shadow felt like it was plotting against them, and every errant breeze carried the whisper of an ancient curse. Or maybe that was just her imagination. She'd been accused of having one that could turn a dust bunny into a death trap. "Think we're done with the welcoming committee?" Solara asked, glancing at Arnon, who was busy brushing dust and existential dread from his coat. Arnon shrugged, peering into the distance as if expecting another disaster to come strolling out of the ruins, hand in hand with misfortune. Doubt it. This place has a knack for intrigue. As if on cue, a flash of movement caught Solara's eye. Not the kind that said harmless rat, but the kind that screamed plot twist. She grabbed Arnon's arm, dragging him into the cover of a collapsed archway, her favorite kind of architecture, as it conveniently provided both shade and a chance to not die. Company, Solara hissed, pointing to the figures weaving through the rubble like they were late for a very aggressive meeting. Arnon squinted. Rival hunters. Bet they're here for the relic too. Probably didn't get the memo that sharing is caring. Yeah, well, they look like the kind of people who'd respond to memos with flamethrowers. The rival group moved with the precision of a military unit, which was fancy code for the kind that shoots first and asks questions never. Solara counted 5 of them, decked out in gear that actually matched. Probably weren't as fond of scavenging as she was. Think they'll play nice if we ask politely? Solara asked, though she already knew the answer. These types didn't so much as play nice as play dead if you were lucky enough to outgun them. Arnon's grin was more a baring of teeth. Let's just say it's good there's 2 of us. We can outsmart them, or at least outrun them. Outrunning. That's your plan. I didn't think things were that desperate. They're always desperate, he replied, eyes scanning the enemy as they moved closer, obviously searching for something they didn't plan on sharing. Solara weighed their options, which were as numerous as a nun at a burlesque show. They could try talking, something she found about as useful as a parachute in a submarine, or they could put some ancient ruins between themselves and the competition. Let's circle around, get a better look, she suggested, already ducking through the crumbling remnants of the city, her makeshift weapon ready to fall apart with the gentlest breeze but still clutched to her side like a lifeline. Arnon followed, his footsteps quiet in the dust, the kind of quiet you didn't learn without getting too many friends killed. They wove through the ruins, Solara's heart pounding in her ears loud enough to raise the dead. Though in this place, the dead probably had better things to do. They stopped behind a once grand wall, now a little more than a pile of decorative rubble. From here, they had a decent view of the rival hunters, who had spread out, combing the area with all the grace of blind men trying to find a black cat in a coal mine. Any bets on how long until they find nothing? Solara asked, trying to inject some levity into the situation. It was either laugh or scream, and she knew which one would get them killed faster. Give them 5 minutes, Arnon replied. But let's not be around when they realize they've got squat. They edged further away, keeping low and out of sight. Solara's boots crunched on debris, each step feeling like a neon sign announcing their presence. She was about to suggest they find some deeper shadows when a voice, smooth and deadly, sliced through the air. Hey there, scroungers. Looking for something? Solara froze, her heart doing its best impression of a hyperactive jackrabbit. They'd been spotted, and not by the friendly neighborhood watch. Turning slowly, they faced the speaker, a tall, lean figure with the kind of confidence that came from knowing you've got backup. Just passing through, Solara said, aiming for casual and landing somewhere around hopeful denial. The rival hunter smiled, an expression that promised everything and delivered nothing. Sure, and I'm just here for the sightseeing. Arnon stepped forward, his voice as calm as ever. We're all here looking for the same thing, right? Maybe we can work something out. The leader considered this, a look of mock contemplation on his face. Not really my style. I prefer the kind of arrangement where you leave and we take everything. Solara's fingers itched, but she held back. This wasn't the time for heroics, especially not the kind that ended with a bullet between your eyes. Tempting, but I think we'll pass, she said, backing up a step, her mind scrambling for an out. The rival group's leader chuckled, a sound devoid of humor. Running's an option. Not a good one, but who am I to judge? That was the cue they didn't need twice. Solara and Arnon turned and bolted, the sound of pursuit hot on their heels. Solara wove through the ruins, her heart pounding harder than a drum solo in a rock concert. The city blurred past, each step a testament to her will to survive, despite all evidence that it might be better to lie down and take a nap. A long, eternal nap. Any ideas? Solara shouted over the chaos, her voice barely carrying over the sound of their pursuers. Just one, Arnon said, breathless but determined. Keep running. Brilliant. Why didn't I think of that? Arnon laughed, a rough bark that somehow made Solara's panic simmer down to a manageable boil. Behind them, the rival hunters were closing in, their shouts echoing through the stone maze. Left up here. Arnon shouted, veering sharply around a corner that looked like it was held together by cobwebs and spite. Solara followed, skidding on the loose ground, her boots struggling for purchase. Her lungs burned and her legs felt like they were made of lead, but she pushed on because stopping wasn't an option. Stopping meant the end, and she wasn't quite ready to meet whatever deity had it out for her. They rounded another corner, only to be greeted by a dead end, a wall of stone and disappointment. Solara cursed under her breath, searching desperately for a way out. No windows, no doors, just a whole lot of rock that seemed smug about its impenetrability. Great. Now what? She asked, turning to Arnon, who was surveying the wall like it had personally offended him. Up and over, he said, already scanning for handholds. This is where we find out if you skipped leg day. Every day is leg day when you're running for your life. Solara threw herself at the wall, fingers scrabbling for purchase. The stone was rough, the kind that didn't care about skin or dignity. She climbed with desperation as her motivator, each pull upward a victory against gravity and her own impending doom. Arnon was right behind her, moving with the kind of deliberate pace that suggested he'd done this before, probably more times than he cared to count. They clambered up, the sound of their pursuers growing louder. Solara didn't dare look back, didn't dare let herself think what might happen if she didn't reach the top. Her fingers grazed the edge of the wall and she hauled herself up, gasping as she rolled onto the flat surface. Arnon joined her, and for a moment they lay there, breathless and victorious, staring up at a sky that looked like it had lost its way. Hell of a day, huh? Solara said between gasps. Just getting started, Arnon replied, sitting up and peering over the edge. We need to move before they figure out where we went, right? I'll just catch my breath in the next life. They climbed down the other side, their pace slower but no less urgent. Solara's muscles screamed in protest, but she ignored them. Survival was a stubborn teacher, and she was an even more stubborn student. The city stretched out before them, a maze of ruins and secret paths that only seemed to want to trap them further. Solara knew they'd have to be clever if they wanted to shake their tail for good. Arnon seemed to have the same idea. We need to lose them in the tunnels. Solara nodded, though she felt a flicker of unease. The tunnels were a labyrinth of darkness and dead ends, a place where the city's secrets were buried so deep they'd probably never see daylight again. Sounds like fun, she said, because sarcasm was her comfort zone, even when staring into the abyss. They slipped into the shadows, the city's corridors swallowing them whole. Solara's instincts screamed at her to keep moving, to stay one step ahead of the danger nipping at their heels. It was a dance she knew all too well, and she wasn't about to let herself stumble now. The tunnels were dark and narrow, the air thick with the smell of damp stone and forgotten dreams. Solara could almost hear the city whispering around them, urging them deeper into its embrace. But she wasn't here to listen, she was here to survive. Arnon led the way, his footsteps sure and steady, even as the walls seemed to close in. Solara stayed close, her eyes straining to make out shapes in the murky gloom. Think we lost them? She asked, though she knew it was wishful thinking. For now, Arnon said, his voice low and steady, but we need to get our hands on that relic before they do, sure. Just like finding a needle in a haystack. Only the needle's probably trying to kill us. Wouldn't be the first time. Solara chuckled, the sound a little wild in the confined space. It felt good to laugh, to remind herself that she was still here, still fighting. And as long as she had that, she'd keep pushing forward, no matter what the city threw at them. They moved deeper into the tunnels, the darkness pressing down like a weight. Solara could feel the city watching, waiting, but she refused to give in to its demands. She was here for one reason, and she wasn't leaving until she had what she came for, or until it killed her. Either way, it was going to be one hell of a day. The tunnels stretched on like the universe's longest punchline, with Solara and Arnon cast as the unfortunate suckers waiting for the joke to finally make sense. They'd been running for what felt like the entire history of bad decisions, and the air was thick with the smell of mold and yesterday's regrets. "Tell me again why we're down here," Solara asked, her voice echoing like a ghost with bad timing. "Because it beats getting shot topside," Arnon replied, his eyes scanning the dim passage like he expected a minotaur to jump out and ask them a riddle. "Yeah, because the only thing worse than getting shot is getting lost in a death trap designed by a sadist." Arnon chuckled, the sound as dry as the dust they were kicking up. "You're saying you don't trust the ancient architects?" "I'm shocked." They stumbled into a larger chamber, a cavernous space that appeared to be waiting for a more prestigious event than two scruffy treasure hunters and their existential crises. Solara's eyes were drawn to the center, where something metal gleamed with the kind of promise that usually came with strings attached. "Could that be it?" Solara whispered, though the silence was hardly holy enough to demand reverence. Arnon squinted, his expression the kind that said he didn't trust anything that didn't actively try to kill him first. "Looks like it. Only one way to find out." They approached the object, a relic, unlike any child's toy they'd seen before, which was saying something given how much space junk they'd combed through. It was an intricate contraption, all gears and gizmos, like someone had given a clockmaker a death wish and too much free time. "Doesn't look like much," Solara said, but she knew better than to trust her eyes in a place like this. "Probably because it's not finished," Arnon replied, kneeling to examine the device. "Looks like it's part of a bigger setup. Great. More missing pieces." "Story of my life." Arnon chuckled again, though this time it edged towards genuine humor. Always the optimist. As they inspected the relic, Solara couldn't shake the feeling they were being watched. The shadows seemed to press in, the kind of dark that felt deliberate. She shivered, wishing she could shake the sense of foreboding like a bad hangover. "Any idea what it actually does?" Solara asked, her voice bouncing off the walls like a nervous child. Arnon nodded, his brow furrowed as he studied the device. "Looks like a sun shield generator. Could protect a whole planet from its star." "Well, that's unexpected," Solara said, trying to wrap her head around the implications. "So not just a fancy light show." "Not unless you're into catastrophic solar flares," Arnon replied, his tone as dry as the air around them. The humor of their predicament wasn't lost on Solara. They'd been chasing a shiny trinket, and now they found themselves holding the key to planetary salvation, or destruction, depending on how you looked at it. The universe had a twisted sense of irony, and she had a front-row seat. "That's probably why everyone else wants it," Solara said, glancing nervously back the way they'd come. The sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the tunnels, a reminder that they weren't alone, and their little discovery had made them public enemy number one. Solara exchanged a glance with Arnon, and they both knew what they had to do. "Time to move, then," Solara said, her voice firm despite the anxiety curling in her gut. "Let's get out of here before the welcome party arrives." They moved quickly, retracing their steps through the labyrinthine tunnels, the relic carefully stashed in Solara's backpack. The weight of it pressed against her, reminding her of the stakes they'd inadvertently raised. It was more than just a treasure now. It was a bargaining chip in a deadly game they hadn't even known they were playing. Emerging back into the daylight felt like stepping into a different world, one where the sun blazed overhead with the kind of intensity that made you appreciate the idea of a sun shield all the more. But there was no time to linger. The rival hunters were still out there, and they wouldn't be the only ones interested in what Solara and Arnon had found. "Where do we go from here?" Solara asked, scanning the horizon for any sign of their pursuers. "Far enough away to catch our breath," Arnon replied, his eyes narrowed against the harsh light. They moved through the ruins, sticking close to the shadows as if they were old friends. Every noise made Solara jump, her nerves fraying like a cheap sweater. She knew they'd have to keep moving, keep fighting, until they could figure out their next move. The echo of gunfire in the distance wasn't exactly reassuring. The rival hunters were still out there, and they were probably about as happy with their failed pursuit as a cat without its cream. "Think they'll back off?" Solara asked, though she didn't hold out much hope. "Doubt it. They're like a bad rash, persistent and hard to shake. Lovely imagery. Can always count on you for a pep talk." They continued moving, the city a maze of potential hiding spots and ambush points. Solara tried to focus on the path ahead, but her mind kept circling back to the relic strapped to her back and the new complications it represented. The conglomerate was bound to find out eventually, and they weren't exactly known for their leniency. The thought of their cold, calculated response sent a chill down her spine, one that had nothing to do with the weather. "Any bright ideas?" Solara asked, trying to keep her voice light. "Working on it. We need a place to regroup, somewhere they won't find us right away, right? Because hiding from a galaxy-spanning conglomerate should be easy." Arnon gave her a wry smile. "Look on the bright side. At least we won't be bored." They found temporary refuge in an old structure that looked like it had seen better centuries. The roof was mostly intact, and the walls offered enough protection to make it a decent place to catch their breath. Solara sank to the floor with a sigh, the exhaustion of the day catching up with her. Her muscles ached, and her mind was a whirlpool of what-ifs and worst-case scenarios. Arnon settled across from her, his expression thoughtful. "We need to figure out our next move." "Yeah, because hiding out here isn't exactly a long-term strategy," Solara replied, rubbing her temples. They both sat in silence for a moment, the weight of their situation pressing down like a cosmic joke with no punchline. Solara's mind raced, trying to come up with a plan that didn't end with them as just another pair of nameless casualties in the universe's ledger. "Maybe we can find the rest of the pieces." She suggested. The words tentative could work. "Problem is, we don't know where they are and we're running on borrowed time. Then we need a distraction. Something to keep everyone else off our backs while we figure it out." Arnon nodded, his expression shifting into something that resembled grudging admiration. "Not bad. Got any ideas?" "Not yet. But if there's one thing I've learned, it's that desperation breeds creativity." "Funny. I thought it just got us into more trouble." Solara chuckled, the sound a little wild. "Why not both?" They spent the next few hours poring over the maps and notes they'd collected, trying to piece together a plan that wouldn't get them killed immediately. The city was a sprawling mess of ruins and forgotten corners, any of which could hold the missing parts of the relic, or more danger than they could handle. As they worked, the reality of their situation settled over them like a shroud. The relic was a powerful piece of technology, one that could change the balance of power in the sector. And that meant everyone with a shred of ambition and a willingness to spill blood was going to be after it. "Think we'll ever catch a break?" Solara asked, her voice low. "Doubt it. But that's what makes it interesting, right?" "Yeah. Interesting." The sun was starting to set by the time they felt ready to move again. The shadows grew long and the air cooled, a perfect time for sneaking around a ruined city while avoiding death. They slipped out of their temporary refuge, the relic safely stowed and their senses on high alert. Solara felt the weight of the world on her shoulders, but she knew she'd carry it as far as she had to. There was no turning back now. The city felt alive in the twilight, the ruins whispering promises of secrets and threats. Solara and Arnon moved with purpose, determination stiffening their spines. They had a mission and they'd see it through, come hell or high water. And judging by the universe's sense of humor, they were likely to encounter both. The Temple City looked like it was auditioning for the role of Apocalypse Central in some cheap holodrama, and the only thing missing was a dramatic soundtrack of impending doom. Solara stood with Arnon on what could generously be called a roof, watching as the first ships of the conglomerate's fleet darkened the sky. They were the kind of ships that screamed overcompensation louder than a billionaire's moon-sized mansion. "Guess someone RSVP'd to our little treasure hunt," Solara muttered, squinting at the looming shadows. Arnon grunted, eyes narrowed. "Looks like they brought enough firepower to argue the point." "Never pegged them as the subtle type," Solara noted, "and if sarcasm were a knife, hers would be a machete." Below, the ruins shivered as if they'd decided to give up the pretense of being solid. Dust rose in clouds, and the distant rumble of engines was the kind of bass that promised bad things for anyone with functional eardrums. "We need to move," Solara said, her voice carrying the urgency of a person suddenly realizing they were out of milk before breakfast. Arnon nodded. "Back to the tunnels." Better to be the rat than the cheese. They bolted for the nearest opening, slipping into the shadowy embrace of the tunnels. The walls were clammy, like the inside of a forgotten fridge, and the air was stale enough to suggest it had given up on hopes of ever being fresh again. As they navigated the labyrinth, the echo of distant explosions vibrated through the stone, a grim reminder that the conglomerate wasn't there for a friendly chat over space tea. "You know," Solara said, her voice low, "I was really hoping to keep a low profile. You and me both." But apparently, the universe disagrees. They reached a larger chamber where the rest of their ragtag group of treasure hunters and misfits were gathered. A bunch that looked like desperation had mated with last week's laundry pile. Misha, a wiry technician with a penchant for swearing in 3 languages, greeted them with a scowl. "About time you showed up. Thought we were gonna have to start without you. Wouldn't want to miss the party," Solara shot back. "What's the situation?" "Bad. Worse than your jokes," Misha said, crossing her arms. "We're low on everything: ammo, food, common sense." Arnon scanned the group, eyes landing on each familiar face. "Anyone seen anything useful?" Rowan, their resident weapons expert, spat on the ground. "If you count broken hopes and dreams as useful." The tension in the air was thicker than the dust motes swirling around them. Solara knew they were cornered, rats in a maze with a cat lurking outside. But she also knew they couldn't just roll over and wait for the end. "We're not done yet," Solara said, injecting as much confidence as she could muster into her words. "We hold this place and make them work for it." Misha rolled her eyes. "And how do you propose we do that? Ask them nicely to bugger off." Solara grinned, a feral smile that promised she'd go down swinging. "Something like that." The group began preparations to defend their position, barricading entrances and counting their dwindling supplies. Solara felt the weight of the relic in her pack, its promise a double-edged sword ready to slice them in every direction. As the Iors dragged on, the sense of impending doom settled like a second skin. The sounds of battle echoed through the tunnels, a cacophony of violence that reminded Solara of a rock concert attended by the clinically insane. Then came the betrayal. Hadrian, one of their scouts, slinked back into the chamber with a guilty look that screamed, "I stepped in it, and now it's all over my shoes." "Hadrian," Arnon said, his voice a low rumble, "where have you been?" The scout shifted, avoiding eye contact like a kid caught with his hand in the cookie jar. Just checking the perimeter. Making sure we weren't being flanked." Solara's instincts flared, a red flag waving vigorously in the recesses of her mind. "And, did you find anything?" "Nothing. Nothing yet," Hadrian replied, but his voice wavered and Solara wasn't buying what he was selling. At first it was a whisper, a doubt curling inside her mind like smoke. But then her suspicion cemented when Rowan chimed in, a dangerous edge in his voice. "Then why's there a conglomerate badge in your pocket, Hadrian?" The scout's face blanched and he stammered, I was going to tell you. I swear." "Tell us what exactly?" Solara pressed, her tone sharp enough to cut. I made a deal. Thought if I could get them the relic, they'd let us walk." The betrayal crashed over them, a betrayal so thick that it felt like an anchor in her gut. Solara stepped forward, her anger a tangible force. And you thought you could trust them. The conglomerate doesn't do favors, Hadrian. They do graves. Hadrian wilted under the collective glare of the group, his voice small. You just endangered all of us, Arnon finished, his voice flat with disappointment. The group was silent, the kind of silence that made your ears ring with the lack of sound. Solara knew they couldn't afford to dwell on it, though. There was no time for broken loyalties, not when survival was on the line. Arnon's voice cut through the tension. We need every advantage we can get. If we're going to make it through this, we stick together. No more freelance dealings. And what about him? Misha asked, jerking her chin towards Hadrian. Solara considered the scout, the weight of leadership a chain around her neck. We'll keep an eye on him. She paused. But if he so much as twitches funny, he'll wish the conglomerate got him first. It was a harsh sentence, but then again, harsh was the only language survival understood. The group got back to work, the betrayal still simmering beneath the surface but temporarily shelved in favor of more immediate concerns, like not getting vaporized. As the night wore on, Solara found herself alone at one of the makeshift barricades. The shadows clung to the walls like cobwebs, and she couldn't help but wonder if they'd all been spinning their own webs of doom and destiny. Arnon appeared beside her, his presence a comforting weight in the dark. "You okay?" "Not really," she admitted. "But I've been worse." He nodded, the lines on his face deepening with the kind of experience that came from seeing too much. "You handled it well. The betrayal, I mean," Solara snorted. "Yeah, well, maybe I'm getting used to it. Betrayal's like a bad penny always turning up." "True enough," Arnon said, his voice as wry as ever. "But still, you did good." She shrugged, trying to let his words settle over her like a warm blanket. "I just hope it's enough." They fell into silence, listening to the distant rumble of the conglomerate's forces. The odds were stacked against them, but Solara knew they couldn't afford to give up. Not now. Not ever. Eventually, they returned to the group, who were gathered around a makeshift map of the tunnels. Rowan and Misha were whispering in hushed tones, the kind that suggested they were plotting something that might just get them killed, which, after all, was better than getting killed without a plan. "What's the word?" Solara asked, drawing their attention. Rowan looked up, a glint of something dangerous in his eyes. "We've got an idea. It's a bit mad, but it just might work." "Mad's good," Solara replied, her lips quirking into a half-smile. "Let's hear it." Misha leaned forward, pointing at a section of the map. "There's an old generator room here. We rig it to blow, take out a chunk of their forces. And hope it doesn't collapse the rest of the tunnels on our heads," Arnon added dryly. "Details," Misha said with a dismissive wave. "Anyway, it gives us an opening. Buy us time to find the missing pieces of the relic." Solara considered it, turning the plan over in her mind like a puzzle piece that didn't quite fit anywhere. It was risky, sure, but then again, they'd run out of safe options days ago. "All right," she said finally. "Let's do it. Better to go down fighting than just go down." The group moved into action, organizing into teams, one to set the charges, the other to keep watch and distract any unwanted visitors. As they prepared, Solara felt a strange sense of clarity settle over her. The odds were slim, but she'd faced worse. Maybe it was madness, or maybe it was just the stubborn refusal to let the universe have the last laugh. With a final nod to Arnon, she joined the team heading to the generator room. The tunnels seemed to stretch longer and darker the further they went, the oppressive weight of the stone above them a constant reminder of all the ways things could go wrong. When they reached their destination, Misha got to work rigging the charges, her fingers a blur of calculated chaos. Solara kept watch, her senses tuned to every sound, every shift of the air. "Almost there," Misha muttered, her voice barely audible over the pounding of Solara's heart. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps echoed from the tunnel behind them. Solara's stomach dropped like a stone, her instincts screaming danger. "We've got company," she whispered, drawing her weapon. Rowan took position beside her, his face set in grim determination. "Looks like they decided to crash our little party." The first of the conglomerate soldiers appeared, weapons raised, expressions hidden behind visors that probably cost more than Solara's entire wardrobe. "Time to make them work for it," she said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. As the battle erupted, Solara fought with the desperation of someone who knew they were outmatched but refused to go quietly. Each shot, each movement was fueled by a burning need to survive, to prove that even against the vast, uncaring universe, they could fight back. The generator room shook with the force of the explosion as Misha's charges detonated, a cacophony of destruction that echoed through the tunnels. The ceiling shuddered, fragments of rock raining down like a stony confession of their insanity. The dust hadn't even settled when Solara grasped the severity of their situation. They'd bought themselves time, how much she didn't know, but they were still far from safe. With the conglomerate bearing down and betrayal lurking in the shadows, only one thing was certain: the fight was far from over. And for Solara, that was more than enough reason to keep going. Solara Vex stood next to the makeshift barricade, listening to the distant echoes of the conglomerate's elite forces making their way through the tunnels. She wasn't worried. Worried was for people who had something to lose. What she was pissed off, a much more useful emotion when your back was against the wall. Arnon Thorne sidled up to her, his face etched with the kind of weariness that comes only from too many years spent in too many foxholes. "Well," Arnon said, his voice a gravelly testament to every bad decision he'd ever made, that went about as well as a fart in a spacesuit. Solara chuckled, though humor was a rare and endangered species in this part of the galaxy. "Could have been worse." "We could have taken up politics." "Point taken," Arnon replied. "But unless you've got a hidden armory in that pack of yours, I'm fresh out of ideas." Solara tapped the side of her head. "Oh, I've got ideas. Just none that don't end with us getting vaporized." Arnon smirked. "Sounds like my kind of plan." Misha joined them, her wiry frame somehow managing to look both exhausted and wired, like a caffeine addict with a hangover. "I rigged what I could. If they hit that generator room, it'll be like lighting a cig in a powder keg." "Good," Solara replied. "But we need more. We need to get creative." Arnon raised an eyebrow. "Creative how?" "Paint them a threatening mural." "No." Solara's voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper. "We use the relic." Misha blinked. "You mean the big hunk of alien metal that we don't know how to work and which might explode if we touch it wrong?" "Yeah, that one," Solara said, her grin equal parts daring and insane. Arnon scratched his chin, doubt creeping into his eyes. "And how exactly do you propose we use it? Hit them with it and hope they are allergic to bad decisions." "I like bad decisions," Misha chimed in. "They taste like victory and poor life choices." "Look," Solara said, "the relic's incomplete, sure. But it's got power, and if we can figure out how to channel it, maybe we can give them a surprise they won't forget." Arnon sighed, the kind of sigh that spoke of a lifetime of arguing with people who were always wrong. "Fine. Let's say we can do this. What's to stop it from blowing us up along with them?" Solara shrugged. "A little faith, a lot of luck, and a solid goodbye speech." "Well, I was planning on dying someday," Misha quipped. "Guess today might just be the day." "That's the spirit," Solara said, clapping her on the back. "Now let's go make some history, or at least a really good cautionary tale." The trio moved back to the larger chamber where the rest of the team was huddled. Rowan was scrawling something on the floor, his expression one of a man who'd just discovered the universe's cruel sense of humor. "What's the occasion?" Solara asked. "Just documenting our demise for posterity," Rowan replied. "Figure if we're going to get vaporized, I might as well leave behind a sarcastic epitaph." "Nice thought," Arnon said. "But we might just live to tell the tale." Rowan looked skeptical. "I'm not much for gambling, but sure, why not? What's the plan?" Solara pointed to the relic. "We're going to use that." "You mean the glorified paperweight?" Rowan asked, eyebrows raised. "Exactly," Solara said. "We tap into its power, give the conglomerate a taste of their own medicine." Rowan stared at the relic like it might suddenly grow teeth and bite him. All right, I'm in. But if I wake up as a ghost, I'm haunting whoever's idea this was. Deal, Solara said with a grin. Now, let's get to work. They gathered around the relic, a monstrosity of intricate gears and glowing symbols that looked like it had been designed by a committee of mad gods. If desperation had a user manual, this was it. Misha got to work, her hands dancing over the relic's surface with delicate precision. All right, she muttered, let's see if we can get this thing to play nice. The others watched, tension thick enough to choke on. Solara felt her pulse quicken, half expecting the relic to sprout legs and run for it. Arnon leaned close, his voice low. You sure about this? Nope, Solara replied. But we're out of options, and I'd rather go down trying than just go down. The relic hummed to life, a deep, resonant sound that vibrated through the chamber like the universe clearing its throat. Misha's fingers moved faster, adjusting dials, flipping switches, and occasionally swearing like a sailor with a stubbed toe. Got it, she said finally, her voice triumphant. It's ready. Solara looked around at her team, a ragtag bunch of misfits who'd somehow managed to become the closest thing she had to family. All right, folks, let's give them hell. The relic began to glow, light pulsing from its core in waves that seemed to bend reality around it. The air thickened, crackling with the taste of potential disaster. Brace yourselves, Solara warned, gripping her weapon tighter. The first wave of energy hit like a tidal wave, a shockwave of pure power that surged through the tunnels. The ground shook, dust raining down from the ceiling as the relic unleashed its fury. Feels like I'm riding a goddamn lightning bolt, Arnon shouted over the roar. Welcome to the club, Solara replied, her voice barely audible above the chaos. The conglomerate's forces, caught off guard by the sudden onslaught, scrambled to regroup. Solara watched as their coordinated advance shattered into chaos, soldiers stumbling as the ground bucked beneath their feet. They're falling back, Rowan shouted, disbelief coloring his words. Keep the pressure on, Solara ordered. We've got them on the ropes. The relic pulsed again, a second wave of energy blasting through the tunnels. Solara felt the power resonate through her bones, a wild, untamed force that threatened to tear them apart even as it kept them alive. Anyone else feel like we're in the middle of a cosmic pinball game? Misha asked, her voice strained but exhilarated. Just keep shooting, Solara replied, gritting her teeth. We've got to buy ourselves more time. The conglomerate soldiers, rattled but not defeated, began to regroup. Solara watched as they advanced again, determination etched into every line of their faceless visors. Here they come, Arnon said, his voice grim. Let's make them regret it, Solara replied, raising her weapon. The battle raged on, a whirlwind of chaos and destruction that seemed to stretch into infinity. Solara fought with every ounce of strength she had left, every instinct honed to a razor's edge. The relic, a beacon of hope and madness, continued to pulse, its power a constant reminder of the thin line they walked between victory and annihilation. They're not giving up, Rowan said, his voice tight with frustration. They will, Solara replied, determination burning in her gut. We just have to hold out a little longer. The relic pulsed again, a final, desperate surge of power that sent shockwaves rippling through the tunnels. Solara felt the ground lurch beneath her, a seismic shift that sent her sprawling. Brace, Arnon shouted, his voice barely audible over the cacophony. Solara hit the ground hard, the impact jarring her teeth. She tasted blood, a metallic tang that mixed with the acrid scent of smoke and ozone. As the dust began to settle, Solara pushed herself to her feet, her muscles screaming in protest. The chamber was a mess of debris and chaos, the relic's light dimming as its energy finally waned. Everyone okay? She called, her voice hoarse. Misha coughed, her silhouette emerging from the haze. I'm alive, which is more than I expected. Same here, Rowan added, his expression one of dazed relief. Arnon clapped Solara on the back, his grin as weary as it was triumphant. Well, that was one hell of a show. Not over yet, Solara replied, her gaze fixed on the tunnel entrance. The conglomerate forces, battered but still formidable, regrouped for another push. "Let's give them a reason to turn tail," she said, determination etched into every word. With renewed strength and a plan as mad as the universe itself, they faced the oncoming storm, ready to fight, to endure, and if necessary, to die on their own terms. Because in the end, that's all they had left: their will, their fire, and the unshakable belief that they could bend the universe to their will, even if just for a moment. And if that wasn't enough, well, at least they'd go out with a bang. The grand plan to convince the universe that humanity was more than just a plague on the galactic landscape hinged on a relic that looked like it had been cobbled together by a drunk octopus. Solara stood at the edge of the larger chamber, staring at the dimming glow of the alien artifact like it might suddenly burst into a motivational speech or start handing out business cards. "All right, folks," she said, glancing around at her ragtag crew, "we've got one last shot at this, and I'm not talking tequila." Misha, still riding the adrenaline high like a roller coaster with no brakes, was prodding the relic with the same tender care you'd show a wild animal with a penchant for biting. "So, what's the master plan? We gonna make this thing do the Macarena? No dance moves required, just some good old-fashioned alien tech wizardry," Solara replied. "We tap into its full potential and build a shield around the sun. That'll make the conglomerate think twice before they play solar roulette." Arnon snorted, the sound like gravel being ground underfoot. "You're assuming they've got brains to think with rather than just egos." "Hey, egos are like inflatable rafts," Solara said with a grin. "They're great until they pop." Rowan, who'd been quiet, likely contemplating which sarcastic epitaph would suit him best, chimed in. "So how do we juice this thing up? Sacrifice a goat, pray to the void." "My vote's on the goat," Misha said, ever the pragmatist. "But barring that, I've got a few tricks up my sleeve." Solara nodded, appreciating Misha's enthusiasm for turning even the simplest tasks into potential explosions. "Good. Pull what you can from the other tech we've got lying around. We're making a shield, not a fireworks show." "Always wanted to play God," Misha mused, as she rummaged through a pile of salvaged alien junk. "Guess now's my chance." "Just remember," Arnon said, "playing God comes with responsibilities, like having a backup plan for when everything goes to hell." "With a backup plan," Solara replied. "No pressure." With that, the team sprang into action, or, in Rowan's case, a reluctant shuffle that suggested he'd rather be anywhere else, like a tropical beach or the relative safety of a conglomerate cell. As Misha rigged the relic to the assorted alien tech, Solara took a moment to consider their situation. They'd been outgunned, outnumbered, and generally out of luck since they'd set foot in the Temple City. But here they were, still standing, still fighting, still flipping the cosmic bird to the conglomerate and their overcompensating fleet ships. "How's it going, Misha?" Solara called over the clatter of gears and the occasional spark that definitely wasn't there for dramatic effect. "Like trying to get a cat to take a bath," Misha replied, her voice muffled as she disappeared under a mess of wires. "But I think we're getting somewhere." Arnon shook his head, his expression that of a man who'd seen too many plans go sideways. "We're betting humanity's survival on a hunk of metal and a prayer. And a whole lot of stubbornness," Solara added, patting the relic like it was a particularly temperamental pet. "Don't forget that." Misha's head popped up, a wild gleam in her eyes that suggested she was either onto something or about to blow them all sky high. "All right, I think I've got it. Just need to flip the switch and hope we don't end up as space dust." "Words of encouragement," Rowan quipped. "Just what I needed to hear." "Let's light it up," Solara said, feeling that familiar mix of hope and impending doom settle in her gut. She gestured for Arnon to take up position at the entrance. "Arnon, you keep an eye out. If they get through, we're hosed." "Got it," Arnon replied, his rifle at the ready like it was an old friend with questionable intentions. With a flick of her wrist, Misha threw the switch, and the relic hummed back to life, brighter, angrier, like a star on the verge of a tantrum. the chamber filled with a dazzling light show that made Solara squint and wonder if this was how ants felt under a magnifying glass. The relic began to pulse, not the wild, chaotic throbbing from before, but a steady, deliberate rhythm that suggested it was finally in tune with whatever cosmic force powered it. Solara held her breath, half expecting the whole thing to implode. "Shields forming," Misha announced, her voice triumphant and laced with disbelief. "We might just pull this off." Outside, the conglomerate forces hesitated, caught off guard by the sudden display of power. Solara could see them through the haze, their formation faltering as they reassessed the situation. The arrogant swagger was gone, replaced by something resembling caution. "Look at them," Arnon muttered. "Running like chickens from a fireworks display." "Well, we do have a penchant for overdoing it," Solara replied, a grin ghosting across her lips. "And we're about to make sure they remember us." The relic continued to shine, a beacon of defiance in the face of overwhelming odds. Solara could feel the energy coursing through the chamber, as tangible as the air she breathed. It was working. Against all odds, it was working. The conglomerate's ships, those massive, overcompensating hulks, began to shift in orbit. Solara squinted, watching as they moved away from the planet's focus, their cautious retreat slow but unmistakable. "They're backing off," Rowan said, disbelief weaving through his words. "I can't believe it." "Believe it," Solara replied, her heart pounding in her chest. "We've given them something to think about." But even as hope ignited her spirit, Solara knew better than to rest easy. The relic's glow was fading, its energy waning like a candle burning too fast. It had bought them time, but not much else. The conglomerate would regroup, and when they returned, they'd be ready. "Well, that was fun while it lasted," Misha said, her tone a mix of satisfaction and weariness. "We're still alive," Solara replied, "and as long as we are, we've got a chance." As the relic dimmed, its light now a mere flicker, Solara looked at her crew. They were battered, bruised, and exhausted, but still standing, still grinning like lunatics in the face of fate. Arnon stepped forward, his gaze fixed on Solara. "So what's next, fearless leader?" Solara took a deep breath, letting the question settle like a weight on her shoulders. "We innovate. We find a way to make this work permanently. The conglomerate's got numbers and firepower, but we've got brains and a knack for making miracles happen. And poor decisions," Rowan added, a smirk tugging at his lips. "Wouldn't have it any other way," Solara replied. "Now let's pack up and get out of here before they change their minds and decide to nuke us from orbit." As they gathered their gear and prepared to leave the chamber, Solara couldn't help but feel a sense of determined optimism. They'd been through hell and back, faced down impossible odds and come out swinging. And if the universe wanted to throw another curveball their way, well, they'd be ready. With a grin and a middle finger raised high. Because in the end, that was what humanity did best: fight, survive, and make sure everyone knew they wouldn't go quietly into the night. The dust settled, and for a brief, almost surreal moment, the universe decided to give Solara and her merry band of misfits a break. Or maybe it was just catching its breath before the next bout of cosmic calamity. Either way, they'd take what they could get. Solara surveyed the chamber, where the relic now sat like an exhausted marathon runner, its glow reduced to a dim flicker. "Looks like our friend here's on its last legs," she said, patting it with the affection one might show a trusty but temperamental toaster. Misha, who had resurfaced from her tangle of wires, smirked. "Yeah, I'd say it's spent." Still not bad for a piece of alien tech that was mostly collecting dust and existential dread. Rowan leaned against a nearby wall, looking as enthusiastic as a cat at a dog show. "Great! So we've got a half-dead relic and a conglomerate that's only slightly less pissed off than before. Progress. Progress," Solara affirmed, because in their line of work, progress often looked like the aftermath of a bar brawl. "Now we just need to keep the relic from falling into the wrong hands while figuring out how to make it work permanently." "Sounds easy," Arnon grunted, checking his rifle. "Kind of like teaching a rock to sing." "Good thing we're the stubborn type," Solara replied. "Let's secure what we can and move out." We've got a spaceship full of conglomerate goons to evade. They got to work, packing up their makeshift command post with the efficiency of a well-practiced disaster cleanup crew. Misha took the lead on gently detaching the relic from its temporary setup, her hands moving with the careful precision of a bomb diffuser who just remembered the manual was in another language. "Think we can keep this thing running long enough to give the conglomerate another black eye?" Rowan asked, his voice as dry as a desert afternoon. "That's the plan," Misha replied, her eyes focused on the task at hand. "Assuming it doesn't decide to self-destruct in protest." "Encouraging," Rowan said, rolling his eyes. "Remind me why I stick around with you lunatics again." "Because you love us," Solara said, grinning as she slung a backpack over her shoulder. "And we make excellent company." Arnon snorted. "More like we're the only people who will put up with your sarcasm and questionable fashion sense." Rowan shrugged, unfazed. "Fair enough." With the relics securely packed and their gear stowed, they made their way through the labyrinthine tunnels, the shadows closing in like the whisper of forgotten ghosts. The air was thick with the promise of more trouble, but for now, they'd travel in the relative safety of obscurity. "So, what's the plan for keeping this relic out of conglomerate hands?" Misha asked, her voice echoing softly in the confined space. "Thinking we stash it somewhere they are not likely to look," Solara replied. "Maybe a backwater planet with a reputation for being as welcoming as a porcupine in a pillow fight." "Good idea," Arnon said, nodding. "No one likes dealing with ornery locals." Rowan chimed in, his tone light but serious. "And what about us?" "We can't keep running forever." Solara paused, her gaze turning inward as she considered their options. "We find allies, people who can help us understand this tech and use it to keep the conglomerate at bay. If they want to play solar roulette, then let's make sure the odds aren't in their favor." "Sounds like a plan," Misha said, her enthusiasm undimmed by the daunting task ahead. "I've always wanted to dabble in interstellar diplomacy, or is it interstellar chaos?" "With us, the line's pretty thin," Arnon remarked, a dry chuckle escaping him. They moved quickly, navigating the winding paths with the ease of those who had spent too much time in dark places. The tunnels were a maze, but they'd learned to read the signs: scratched walls, faded markings, the occasional ominous warning left by previous visitors who'd probably had less favorable outcomes. Eventually, they emerged into the desolate city, the ruins casting long shadows that spoke of forgotten eras and abandoned hope. The conglomerate's presence was still palpable, like a bad smell that lingered long after its source was gone. Solara squinted at the sky, where the conglomerate's ships were still visible, their movements cautious, like predators unsure if their prey was worth the hassle. "Looks like they're still keeping an eye on us." "Can't say I blame them," Rowan said. "We're a charming bunch. Charming or not, we need to get out of their crosshairs," Solara replied. "Let's head for the ship. We'll figure out our next move once we're off this rock." The trek through the city was uneventful, though the tension in the air was thick enough to choke on. Every corner held the potential for ambush, every shadow a possible threat. But they pressed on, driven by the knowledge that standing still wasn't an option. "Don't suppose anyone's got a brilliant idea for getting off this planet without attracting attention?" Rowan asked as they neared their ship, its battered hull a welcome sight. "Stealth mode," Misha suggested, her grin wide. "I've been tinkering with the cloak. Should get us past their sensors, or, send up a giant flare." "Always with the optimism," Arnon noted, shaking his head. "But it's better than nothing." Once aboard, they settled into the cramped space, the ship's interior familiar and oddly comforting. It smelled of metal, sweat, and the faint tang of burnt circuits, like home, if home came with a permanent threat of disassembly. "Let's see if this cloak holds," Solara said, taking her place at the controls. "Everyone buckle up. If this goes south, I don't want to be picking anyone up with a spatula." "You paint such a lovely picture," Rowan quipped, securing himself in his seat. The ship hummed to life, the engines a low, steady thrum that filled the space with a comforting vibration. Solara's fingers danced over the controls, and the cloak engaged with a flicker of light, bending the ship's signature into something untraceable. "Looks like we're ghosting," Misha said, watching the readouts with a mix of pride and anticipation. "Let's hope it lasts until we're out of their reach," Solara replied, guiding the ship with the care of a mother duck leading her ducklings across a busy street. The city dwindled behind them, the ruins fading into the haze of distance as they ascended. The conglomerate ships hovered like distant stars, unaware or perhaps simply uninterested in the tiny speck slipping past them. "Think they'll miss us?" Arnon asked, his tone light but edged with genuine concern. "Like a bad hangover," Solara replied. "But by the time they notice, we'll be long gone." Once they cleared the planet's atmosphere, the ship's pace increased, the stars stretching out like glittering promises against the void. They had a destination, one of those backwater planets Solara had mentioned, where the locals were more likely to greet visitors with a shotgun than a smile. "So what's our plan once we land?" Rowan asked, his voice pitched low as if he were afraid to disturb the fragile peace that had settled over them. "We lay low," Solara said. "Find someone who can help us figure out what's going on with this relic. And if we can't," Misha asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. "Then we keep running," Solara replied, her voice firm. "Because until we can make this relic work for us, it's the only card we've got." The ship slipped into hyperspace, the stars blurring into streaks of light that filled the view screen with an almost hypnotic pattern. They had time now, time to plan, to regroup, to hope. "So, this is where we make our great stand, huh?" Arnon said, his gaze fixed on the stars. "Yeah," Solara replied softly. "Because if we don't, who will?" The question hung in the air, unanswered but not unacknowledged. They were a ragtag bunch, underfunded, overwhelmed, and outgunned. But they had each other, and as Solara had learned long ago, that counted for something. "Here's to another day of proving the universe wrong," Rowan said, raising an imaginary glass in a toast. "May it be one of many," Solara replied, her heart lifting at the thought. They had a long way to go, and the future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, it felt like they had a fighting chance. And that, in this mad, dangerous galaxy, was more than enough. As the ship hurtled through space, its crew settled into a comfortable silence, each lost in thoughts of what lay ahead. They'd faced down the conglomerate, defied the odds, and emerged on the other side with a relic and a plan. Maybe they'd pull it off. Maybe they'd even save the day. But even if they didn't, they'd go down fighting, and they'd make damn sure the universe remembered. Because if humanity had to go out, they'd do it with a bang.